Now, the National Teachers Union, that's NATU, has expressed frustration at Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga's failure to follow up on meetings with unions on the readiness of schools to reopen. Stakeholders have, of course, raised concerns about schools that may not be fully prepared to operate. Many schools have not even received personal protective equipment, and there are concerns about whether all schools have indeed even been disinfected, that is. Our reporter Mahlako Komane has been checking in on some of the schools across Gauteng and joins us in studio now. Mahlako, it certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all. There isn't a blanket decision that can be made here, but certainly one that the minister says is going to be a tough one for her department.
Yes, you're quite right. There is no blanket approach. You would also recall that, the landscape of the country that we find ourselves in. You have your rural schools, you have your urban schools, and you have those schools that are in the middle. And schools that have been historically disadvantaged and continue to be disadvantaged. These are the schools that do not have water. But I think also it's actually quite concerning that 2 to 3 months later, since you heard the minister also say that they have effectively lost a term of teaching. And it would seem that the planning, we wonder when the planning actually started happening, because she also said that it was inevitable that schools were going to open. The question then becomes, if you knew closing schools in March, that schools would then need to open, at which point did you start planning where you are scrambling at the last minute to decide, are we opening, are we then not opening? But I think also the fact that unions are the ones that must give directive of what is happening in the sector is also quite concerning. If you remember, a few weeks back, the union said they had conducted their own survey that told them that the schools were not ready. And, they had people on the ground, and all the unions actually released a joint statement speaking to that matter, that schools are not ready. The issue of water was addressed, the issue of PPEs. The department, irrespective of that, decided that, the minister herself said that she was confident with what provinces were telling her. It's the very same provinces that are coming out and saying that some of their schools are not ready. This morning, Arabile, we were in Motse. We were there yesterday as well. There were no masks for schools, for learners as well as teachers. Then you ask yourself, how do we then define readiness and what it means and so forth? And also, if you also listen to the briefing, the issue of water as well, the schools that don't have water up until now. We spoke to the minister on Thursday at the schools that she mentions that she was in, your Oliven as well as in Ivory Park. We asked about the issue of water, and she said she had a plan B. So it seems like it's a bit. I don't know who's more confused as to what's happening in the sector. Is it parents or is it the department itself that there are last-minute meetings? Also, I think, does the department actually know what's going on in the ground at their schools? Are they actually aware of the full picture of what's going on at schools?
One can imagine, though, that, we'd be able to give the government a little bit of leeway when it comes to this scenario and say, yes, we're aware that you don't know exactly how to go about this, because it's not a situation that's happened before, but the communication has certainly been lax as well in this scenario, Mahlako. Have you found that perhaps they're now trying to get a little bit more communication, or are the schools taking matters sort of into their own hands here?
I think teachers and principals and school management teams, the way it's beginning to look like, are having to make executive decisions for themselves as to what must happen. A school last week had in Gauteng and it's one of the better schools, so to speak, in Gauteng, saying that they were not ready. This is a so-called very good school you find in the province, saying that they were only able to open on the 8th. So it would seem that schools are actually making their own decisions because they're not getting leadership. It seems like the department is failing to provide leadership to schools as to what is happening on the ground. And also, I think, like I said, when you go into schools like Musi, there was another school, funny enough, not so far from the school that we also went to. We also went to that school as well, Mhlame Senior Secondary School, where the principal, they had said, we decided as a school, because the entire district did not have masks for teachers and for educators that they were meant to receive as early as last week, and saying that they had then gone into pocket and decided to get one of the local dressmakers to sew masks for their learners, and they're trying to have at least that prescribed 2 masks per learner out of their own pockets.
Sure.
These are non-fee paying schools. And if a fee paying school is saying, we're not ready, you then wonder what is it that is going on, speaks to the issue of communication, but also a handle on the matter. Yes, perhaps the government or the department itself has never been faced with this pandemic, but surely planning as well seems to be lacking here, because you should be able to know, if Labour can say these are the regulations that have been put down, how are you then best following them? I think that it would seem that there is no handle on what is happening at schools from the side of department at national and seemingly even at some provinces where, I mean, schools must make their own decisions.
Mahlako, very quickly, we have run out of time though. What's the state of readiness, and how sure are we then, as government gives assurances, that schools will indeed be open next Monday?
You know, they have this week, but I mean, I'll go back again, point in case, it took them 17 days to deliver PPEs to the SMTs. 17 days. On the 10th of May, they said to us that they were ready. It was coming in within the following days. 17 days later, it was only that those masks were and the sanitizers were in the hands of school management teams. Will they then need another 17 days from today or from last week to then deliver for just the grade 7s and the grade 12s? There's quite a lot that is left to be desired in this case. In terms of readiness, it's really tricky to say, because we'll find ourselves again on a Sunday evening, parents not being sure, are they going back to school or are they not going back to school? So, I mean, the ball is in the department's hands, but really, I think they are losing confidence from the sector at large, but I think as well as parents, which are one of the biggest stakeholders in the department.
Sure. Yeah, well, for a country that has very low literacy levels, it's critical, absolutely critical, that the year does continue in some way or form at the right health levels. And certainly planning would have been very important for that. Mahlako Komane, thank you so much for that report. Appreciate it as well. Let's keep up with the same story now. Relief for many townships around Port Elizabeth over delays in the reopening of schools. Many of the schools in the Nelson Mandela Bay still do not have enough personal protective equipment to cater for pupils or even supporting staff. There's also a shortage in water at many schools in the area. Water tanks are yet to be delivered, and in some cases, toilets at schools have not even been working since before the lockdown. Pupils of grade 7 and grade 12 are set to return to schools as of the 8th of June, as confirmed by the minister. But some teachers still say a week is still not enough to get schools ready. They say more time is needed in order to train staff, and in some schools, they've not even disinfected those. At some schools, the support staff who are supported to have, said to report for duty, do not show up because there were no masks for them, even in those schools. Let's head on over to the Western Cape now at the same time, where it's the only province in the country that has confirmed the reopening of schools today. This goes against now the Department of Basic Education's announcement last night that schools be reopened next week. Now, Western Cape Education MEC, that's Debbie Schaefer, says her department could no longer allow schools to operate in a state of uncertainty. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa says the safety of children remains government's foremost priority and will not be compromised. In his weekly letter to